Welcome to Cinefanatics in October. I am Robert Adams, and today we will be talking about two different types of people. Those who like horror movies, and then those who are like, no, just go ahead and tell me the ending. Tell me how it ends. I'm not going to see it anyways. You can go ahead and spoil it. It's okay. It's perfectly fine. Today we're going to talk about horror movies. For those who do not like horror movies. This is going to be the list that is good if you want to get into horror, but you're not quite ready to take a full plunge into it yet. This would be a good way to just kind of start and ease into it. Maybe you have a significant other that doesn't like horror movies as much as you do. Maybe you have a brother that you share a movie channel with on YouTube, and he absolutely cannot stand horror movies. So this would probably be what I would use to show him. Basically, from what I've researched, there are three different reasons why people do not like horror movies. First of all, they pure and simple do not like to be scared. Being scared causes your brain to produce adrenaline and dopamine, and sometimes some people just don't like those feelings, those sudden rush of type of things. I like horror movies, but I am kind of the same way. I do not like heights still. If you want to see an example of this, go check out my vlog video up here where I went to the Grand Canyon, and you will see I stay nice and far away from the edge of the Grand Canyon. Call me a pansy, I don't care. Second reason people don't like horror movies is the gore. Nobody wants to see what's inside our body. Everyone wants to keep what's in our body, inside our body. We don't need to see it, but leave that for the doctors. Me personally, I like the gore because when seeing the gore, I like seeing the special effects that people use in it. I like, especially if they're using practical effects, it's absolutely amazing. And some people just can't stomach it, can't stand it, don't want to see it, don't need to see it, just not at all. The third reason people don't like horror movies may be spiritual. A lot of horror movies have to deal with stuff like monsters, demons, spirits, evil forces, stuff like that, depending on what your religious beliefs are and how it relates to you on a personal, spiritual level. Some people that just don't want to touch that, don't want to go anywhere near it, so therefore they stay far away from horror movies. The movies I'm going to be talking about today, though, they are scary movies to some extent. That's why they're called horror movies. They do have an element of scariness to them. There may be involved some kind of a monster, creature, spirit, force, something like that, psychologically deranged, who knows. So expect that to be talked about in these movies. These movies that I'm also going to be talking about, they do have adult themes. Just because I'm saying that these are good movies for people who don't like horror movies does not mean that these are the movies that I would recommend to children to start getting them into horror movies. There's still adult themes in there. There might be at least some violence, language, sex, nudity.
Give me some sugar, baby.
All the good stuff that we all enjoy out of horror movies, those will still be present in here.
Groovy.
I think there is one that might be okay for kids, but use your own parental caution on there because I am not the parent of your kid. You do what you want.
Where are your parents?
Let's jump into it. Our first movie is going to be Beetlejuice. 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 It's showtime! Which was released in 1988. This was Tim Burton's second movie, and it was his first not based off of an already established property. His first movie was Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which was the Paul Reubens character of Pee-wee.
It looked like this!
This movie is about a couple who accidentally died, come back as ghosts, and hire a bio-exorcist, basically a ghostly exterminator, to get rid of the living people who have now moved into their house. This movie used to be a lot darker and grittier and gorier, but it was changed into a comedy, and any gore effects are basically played for laughs. They're not overly detailed, and there's not really too many jump scares in this. Again, this movie is more of a comedy, but there are definitely some more adult type themes in it, definitely innuendo innuendo jokes. And even though it's PG rated, surprisingly at that time they still managed to get away with an F-bomb. So yeah, go figure.
Can you be scary?
Oh, I know they're asking me. What do you think of this? You like it?
So our next movie is Carrie, which came out in 1976. This movie is about a teenage girl with telekinetic powers just trying to live her day in high school. Most of the horror from this movie comes from the fact that she has an overbearing, I would say overly religious mother who just goes to extremes on how she treats her daughter. And then her also being bullied and basically tortured at school by the other students. The famous prom scene is actually not until, like, say, the last fourth of the movie. This is one of Brian De Palma's first horror movies. I actually think it's like his third. And this is Stephen King's first adaptation, his first book novel that has been adapted into film. Well, there's not really too much gore. There is blood, a bucket of it, for those of you familiar with it. But otherwise, like when she goes on her rampage during prom at the end, not really any gore during that. Couple of slight jump scares, but they're not much until like the very end of the movie. And of course, there is the one famous jump scare at the very end. But otherwise, yeah, it's a really good movie. So the next one on the list is Army of Darkness, which was released in 1992. This is the third movie in the Evil Dead series, and if you're familiar with the Evil Dead, the first two movies, I would not recommend for those who do not like horror movies. Those are kind of the bare bone basic reasons why people don't like horror movies. They're just super uber gory and violent. And yeah, just if you don't like horror movies, wait till you build up your immunity or desensitized or whatever before you get into those. Despite this being the third one of the Evil Dead series, there really isn't any gore. The lead hero, Ash, in it does fight the Army of Darkness, which is pretty much made up of a bunch of skeletons. So there's no gore, it's just bones. This movie was separated from essentially the Evil Dead series. Universal Studios wanted to make it a standalone feature, which is great because that means you can actually watch this movie without watching the previous two Evil Dead movies. There is a small little kind of recap at the beginning of Army of Darkness that just kind of shows why Ash is a person from the future who's now back in medieval times, and I'm not talking about the restaurant. Even though this is supposedly a horror movie, it is more on the comedic side. A lot of it is homages to the Three Stooges. So, fantastic movie. I love the Evil Dead series all around, but yeah, definitely like Army of Darkness.
All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up. This is my boomstick!
Next on the list is Gremlins, and I would say this is probably going to be the only one on the list that I would say would be probably okay for older kids to watch again. You parent your kids however you want to, but this is probably the closest to like a family child's type of movie that's on this list. It came out in 1984 and was actually released the same weekend as Ghostbusters, which is another kind of like horror comedy one. I would say Gremlins is probably more family friendly than Ghostbusters, but again, this one, there really isn't any gore to it. There are like some slightly gory parts in regards to the gremlins themselves. No human gore. It's all stuff that happens to the gremlins, whether they get blended in a blender, blown up in a microwave, or melted. All of that happens to the gremlins, not to people. And typically all the gore on the gremlins is just green slime. So if you can handle green slime and that, then you should be fine with Gremlins. Because of that, though, Gremlins did help create the PG-13 rating back in 1984. Between Gremlins and Temple of Doom, with the whole like pulling the heart out of someone's chest scene, that helped the MPAA create the PG-13 rating, in which the first movie with the PG-13 rating was Red Dawn, also released in 1984. As far as the scariness of the movie, there's some jump scares. It's basically like these little gremlins popping out, type of thing at you, but that's about it. So, still, like I said, good movie, family-friendly horror movie. Yeah.
They're inside.
All of them?
Next one is going to be Misery, which came out in 1990. This movie is about an author who gets into an accident up in the snowy mountains and gets taken in by a woman who is absolutely obsessed with this author and his books, to the point where she's a little cuckoo. The thing that makes this a great horror movie is that there's absolutely no supernatural elements to this at all. This actually could happen, and probably has as far as we know. So that makes it extremely terrifying, but also a great edge-of-your-seat thriller. Fantastic movie to watch. This movie was done by Rob Reiner, who was allowed by Stephen King to do Misery after Stephen King saw how Rob Reiner handled the movie Stand By Me, which was based off of the Stephen King short story The Body. There's some small, slight jump scares to this. Not really any gore. I mean, if you're familiar with the hobbling scene from this movie, that's a little freaky, but not really gory. There is some gunshot wounds, but I mean, nothing too major on that. Even though this is a horror movie, what's funny about it is the screenplay was actually written by William Goldman, who was famous for writing both the book and the screenplay of the movie of The Princess Bride, so go figure.
Any for God's,
Shh, darling. Trust me.
God's sake.
It's for the best.
Hey, please!
My next one's going to be a pretty recent movie. It was actually my second favorite movie of last year, and that would be Get Out. This one, of course, was written and directed by Jordan Peele, who's mostly known for comedy, especially the show Key and Peele. This movie was nominated at the Oscars for like Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and actually won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay by Jordan Peele. And you can kind of tell this movie is very reminiscent of like The Stepford Wives or the old 80s horror movie Society, and being John Malkovich. I love this movie. It's a great movie, and it's still one that when you watch it on repeat viewings, you still catch like little hints and nods of stuff that you hadn't seen or hadn't noticed before. Kind of like Usual Suspects was very much like that. Once you know the ending, go back and watch it again, and you just pick up on little pieces of stuff all over the place. It's fantastic. Absolutely love that movie. And yes, there are some slight jump scares to this movie, and there's not really any gore, but there is a close-up scene of some brain surgery, so I mean, if you've seen a human brain before, you should be good with that. And my last movie is actually a very recent release. It came out this year, and it is A Quiet Place. Was John Krasinski's first horror movie. This movie is basically about a family that lives out in the middle of nowhere, that there's aliens around them that are very hypersensitive to sound. So if they make a sound, these aliens are going to find them and kill them, so they can't make a sound. Hence why it's a quiet place. There are jump scares in this movie, but it's due to the fact that most of this movie is quiet. I think there's only like probably about 25 lines of actual dialogue in this movie, something like that. So yeah, you do expect it to be perfectly dead quiet and then something boom pop out at you and make a sound. This movie actually was going to be a part of the Cloverfield series, which is kind of horror-ish. More like, I guess, sci-fi type of thing. And Universal Studios decided to nix that idea, even though it was their idea to begin with, and decided to make it a standalone film. There's not really any gore in this movie. There is some blood here and there, and there is just one really cringy moment with a nail. Otherwise, A Quiet Place was a fantastic movie and probably one of my favorites as far as horror movies go so far this year. I hope you found the movies on this list helpful and maybe you go check out a couple of them. Do you have any other movies that you think are good for people who don't like horror movies to kind of help ease them into that? Let me know down below. I would love to talk about them. We're always in the comments just checking out and see what y'all have to say, so let us know down below. Again, my name's Robert Adams with the Cinefanatics. Please like, comment, subscribe, share this with your non-horror loving buddies if you have any. Try to see if you can get them into the horror movies. And I will catch you in the next one. Later.